"Don't speak, ma'am," Maya whispered, her palm warm and steady over Margaret's lips as the brass door handle began to turn. Margaret jerked back in shock. Her blue-gray eyes widened behind her glasses, and before Maya could explain, the older woman's instincts flared. She slapped at Maya's arm, a sharp crack in the hush of the office. "What are you doing?" her eyes shouted, though her lips stayed muffled. Panic rose in Margaret's chest, the kind that makes rational thought evaporate. Maya held her ground, trembling but firm, desperate to keep Margaret silent. "Please," she breathed through clenched teeth, but the plea only seemed to heighten Margaret's terror. With a sudden surge, Margaret twisted and bit into Maya's hand, the bite quick and fierce, the kind a frightened person delivers without aim. Pain shot through Maya's palm. She winced, nearly cried out, but pressed her lips together, forcing the sound back down into her throat. Outside, footsteps paused. The hallway air slipped under the crack of the door like a warning. Jacob's voice, calm and measured, drifted closer. "Yes, tonight. She's exhausted. No family left. It will look natural." Maya's heart hammered like fists against a door. She swallowed the sting of the bite, her hand trembling but still firm enough to shield Margaret's lips from any involuntary gasp. The billionaire's chest rose and fell like a tide about to break. The tension between them, Black Maid, white employer, fear clashing with instinct, held tight as the storm outside slammed rain against the glass. The footsteps moved again, slow, deliberate, sliding past the office door. The handle eased back into place with a tired click. For one long breath, the house seemed to freeze. Then Jacob's shoes receded, fading into the far hall. Maya lowered her hand at last, flexing her sore fingers where the teeth marks reddened the skin. Margaret's voice snapped out, hushed but fierce, the steel of someone used to being obeyed. "Have you lost your mind?" Maya shook her head, pain and urgency burning through her eyes. "No, ma'am. Please, just listen." Margaret pulled back further, clutching at the armrest of the leather chair, her whole body coiled with alarm. "You don't put your hands on me like that, ever." "I had to," Maya whispered, voice raw, swallowing the lump in her throat. "If you had spoken his name, he would have known we were here. He would have walked in, and you would have been—" her words faltered. "You would have been in danger." Margaret stared, lips parted, as the storm rattled the shutters. Buddy, the golden retriever, barked once from the back stairwell, a sharp note that made both women flinch. Then Margaret's eyes dropped to Maya's bitten hand. A thin line of blood slid from the crescent wound her teeth had left, dripping onto Maya's apron. Margaret recoiled, her lips curling. She pushed her chair back an inch as though the sight itself polluted the polished office. "God," she whispered, her voice thick with disdain. "You're bleeding. That's—" she gestured sharply with her hand. "Filthy. Don't drip on the rug." Maya froze, shame and pain twisting together. She cradled her injured hand, but the urgency in her chest would not let her retreat. "It doesn't matter, ma'am. What matters is what I just heard. Your husband, he's planning to kill you." Margaret's head snapped up, and her face shifted from revulsion to disbelief, then anger. "How dare you?" she hissed. "You think you can walk into my house, touch me, and then spin some jealous story because you resent what I have?" Her voice rose, still sharp but not yet loud enough to carry through the storm. "Is that it? A poor maid who can't stand the sight of someone who built something?" Maya's throat tightened. "No, ma'am, I swear. I heard him on the phone. He said you were exhausted, that it would look natural. Tonight." Margaret stood abruptly, her chair rolling back. "Stop it. Stop this nonsense at once. I will not be insulted in my own home by wild lies. You don't understand the first thing about my marriage, about me." She pointed at Maya's hand with disgust. "And look at you, dirty, bleeding. You bring filth into my study and then think you can poison me with words." "No." Maya blinked hard, the sting of tears almost breaking through, but she stood her ground, shoulders squared though her heart shook. "Ma'am, please, I wouldn't lie about this. You have to believe me. You are in danger." Margaret folded her arms, chin high, fury and denial etched into every line of her face. "Danger? The only danger in this house tonight is you, Maya Williams. I don't know what you're after, but it ends here. If you keep this up, I'll have you dismissed before morning." The storm rattled the window panes, thunder cracking close overhead. For a long moment, they stared at one another, one woman clutching a bleeding hand, desperate to be believed, the other trembling with indignation, convinced she was looking at betrayal from within her own walls. Buddy barked again, sharper this time, as if sensing a truth neither of them was willing to face. Maya drew in a shaky breath, voice low but steady. "You don't have to trust me, ma'am. But you have to stay quiet. For your life." Margaret said nothing, only pulled a silk handkerchief from her pocket and pressed it to her nose, the gesture as much to shield herself from Maya as from the storm. Her eyes, cold and appraising, lingered on Maya like she was a trespasser, not a protector. Outside, Jacob's footsteps returned faintly in the hall, and the weight of the storm pressed down harder. In that silence, heavy and unbroken, Maya knew the battle for Margaret's life had only just begun. The storm had been building all day, pushing dark clouds from the Gulf and settling them heavy over New Orleans. By the time night fell, rain slanted against the shutters with a steady hiss, and every oak in the Garden District bent beneath the wind. Inside Margaret Hale's mansion, the lights flickered, and the antique chandeliers groaned on their chains. The house was no stranger to weather. It had stood for more than a century, brick bones and wrought iron balconies etched with years of Mardi Gras beads and Christmas wreaths. Yet that night it seemed uneasy, restless, as though even its walls could feel what was lurking in its halls. Maya Williams stood near the desk, her bitten hand wrapped in the corner of her apron. The pain throbbed, but it was nothing compared to the ache in her chest from Margaret's words. Filthy. Jealous. A poor maid resentful of her employer's life. She had heard worse before, growing up where people measured your worth by the skin you lived in and the dollars you didn't have. But coming from Margaret, this woman she had worked so hard to serve well, it cut deeper. Margaret herself was pacing now, arms crossed tight against her silk blouse, her heels clicking against the polished hardwood floor. Every few steps, she glanced at Maya with open suspicion, as if expecting the young woman to lunge at her with a knife. "You think I don't know envy when I see it?" she said suddenly, her voice brittle. "I've been dealing with it my whole career. Women who couldn't keep up, men who resented taking orders from me, and now my own maid? My God." Maya inhaled, steadying herself against the sting. She wanted to argue, to insist again on what she'd heard Jacob say in the hall, but she knew words would bounce uselessly off the armor of denial. The storm rattled the windows again, and she let the sound carry her silence. Sometimes truth needed no shouting. It just needed time. The mansion creaked with the wind, but underneath, life inside still had its routine. Down in the kitchen, the scent of gumbo from dinner lingered faintly, seasoned with thyme and bay leaf. The dishwasher hummed softly, its cycle steady and oblivious. Buddy, the retriever, whined from his bed by the back door, then rose to circle the kitchen tiles. Unsettled. The house wanted to be calm, but the people inside had already broken that. Maya stepped toward the window, parting the curtains just enough to peer outside. Street Charles Avenue was empty. No cars glided past. No streetcar bells rang. The storm had driven everyone indoors. Normally, the avenue would be lit by the steady glow of porches, where older couples sat in rocking chairs, sipping bourbon or café au lait and greeting neighbors with a wave. But tonight those porches were dark, and the city felt far away. The only light came from the street lamps, bent halos glowing against sheets of rain. Margaret followed Maya's glance and gave a bitter laugh. Beautiful, isn't it? Even storms can't make this city ugly. She reached for a silver cigarette case on the desk, snapped it open, and lit one with trembling hands. She smoked rarely, only when nerves took her beyond tea and patience. The thin smoke curled toward the high ceiling, mixing with the scent of lemon oil and storm air that leaked through the cracks. Maya turned back. "Ma'am, I don't care if you think I'm jealous. I care about keeping you alive." Margaret exhaled smoke in a sharp plume. "Alive from what? My husband bringing me tea? I should fire you for this nonsense." Maya flinched but did not look away. "Then fire me tomorrow. Tonight. Please. Just listen. I've cleaned enough of this house to know how sound travels. He doesn't know what I heard yet. That's the only reason we have a chance." The words lingered, and for the first time Margaret faltered. She drew another long drag from her cigarette, then crushed it out half-finished. Her eyes softened, though suspicion still lived in their corners. "You're shaking," she said quietly. "Because I'm scared," Maya admitted, voice steady but low. "But fear doesn't make me wrong." Margaret pressed her lips together. She was not ready to accept it, but something about the conviction in Maya's voice unsettled her certainty. She turned away and walked to the bookshelf, running her manicured fingers along the spines of first editions collected from New York and London. "I've given Jacob everything," she murmured. "Every comfort, every chance. You think he'd throw it away?" Maya wanted to answer, but the bitterness in Margaret's tone warned her to hold back. She stayed near the desk, blood seeping slowly into the fabric of her apron, head tilted toward the door, listening. The silence beyond was too quiet, like a stage waiting for the next act. A crack of thunder shook the glass, and Buddy barked again downstairs. The sound echoed up the stairwell and into the office. Margaret frowned, finally noticing the dog's unease. "He never barks like that unless—" Her voice trailed off, the end swallowed by doubt. She turned toward Maya, and for an instant the veil of disdain lifted, replaced by something older, more human, fear. Maya seized the opening. "Let me protect you, please. If you can't trust me, trust your dog. He knows something is wrong." "Do?" Margaret's gaze flicked toward the door, then back to Maya's bitten hand. She grimaced again at the sight of blood. "You'll clean that. I won't have stains on the rug." "I'll clean it later," Maya said, almost whispering, "if there is a later." If you also feel the fear and pain of poor Maya in this moment, give her a like. And don't forget to leave a comment to let us know where you're watching from, because maybe someone right near you is watching this story too. The words hung in the room, heavy as the storm itself. Margaret inhaled sharply, then turned away, unwilling to answer. She pressed her palms against the windowsill, staring out into the rain, and for the first time her shoulders sagged. For a woman who had spent her life building walls of lace and steel around herself, the storm outside had cracked something. Downstairs, the grandfather clock chimed 10. Its hollow toll echoed through the mansion, 12 beats short of midnight, each one a reminder that time was moving whether they were ready or not. Margaret finally spoke, her voice lower, wearier. "All right, Maya. You've said your piece. But if I find out this is some stunt, some twisted trick, you'll regret it." Maya nodded, relief washing through her even under the threat. "That's all I ask, ma'am. Just wait and see. Let the night prove me right or wrong." Lo! The storm outside surged, rattling the iron balcony, rain hammering the glass like 1,000 fists. Inside, the mansion held its breath again. Two women, worlds apart, trapped together by secrets, distrust, and the unseen danger prowling just beyond the office door. Margaret turned from the window, her eyes sharp once more, though now shadowed by doubt she could not banish. "If you're right," she said slowly, "then tonight changes everything." Maya met her gaze, her bitten hand throbbing, her chest tight with the weight of truth. "Yes, ma'am, it does." The lights flickered once more, and then the mansion went still, as though bracing for what was yet to come. The office lay in a tense hush, the kind that turns every small sound into a signal. The wind rattled the shutters and shook the tall oaks outside. But inside, the tick of the mantel clock grew louder than the storm. Maya stood near the door, her shoulders squared though her bitten hand pulsed with pain. Margaret sat stiff in her leather chair, arms crossed tight, her lips pressed thin as if to hold back both questions and curses. The silence between them was thick, but it was not empty. It held judgment, suspicion, and the fragile beginnings of fear. Maya knew this silence too well. Growing up in the projects of Baton Rouge, silence had often been her only shield. As a child, she learned to stay quiet when men argued in the stairwell, when her mother cried into the thin pillow, when hunger clawed through her belly. Words could betray, silence could save. Now, in this grand house with its chandeliers and velvet drapes, that same silence pressed heavy against her lungs. She wiped her injured hand against the apron, careful not to drip onto the rug. Margaret's eyes followed the movement with open distaste. "You'll disinfect that before you touch anything else," she said sharply. "I will not have infection brought into this room." Yes, ma'am, Maya murmured, though her voice trembled. She wanted to say the infection already lived here, festering in the form of a man whose footsteps haunted the halls, but she bit her tongue. Margaret rose from her chair, straightening her silk blouse as if putting her armor back on. You've worked here 3 months, is that right? And in 3 months, you think you know my husband better than I do? That you can accuse him of murder? She shook her head with a bitter laugh. It's absurd. Maya drew in a breath. I don't claim to know him, ma'am. But I heard him. Clear as I hear the storm. He said it would look natural. That tonight was the night. The words landed hard. Margaret turned toward the window, unwilling to meet her gaze. The rain streaked down the glass in silver rivulets, distorting the glow of the street lamp outside. She hugged herself, though she would never admit it was for comfort. You misunderstand, she said finally. Jacob is frustrated. We've had difficulties, but he would never. She stopped. The last word caught in her throat. Maya stepped closer, her voice softer now. I don't need him to be a monster in every way, ma'am. I just need you to believe he is desperate in this one. Desperation makes people dangerous. Margaret spun back, her eyes flashing. And what do you know of desperation? You think because you've scrubbed a few floors you understand the choices of people who build empires? The insult stung, but Maya held steady. I know enough. I've seen men do cruel things for less than what your husband stands to gain. The thunder rolled again, shaking the walls. For a moment, both women flinched the same way, and that shared reaction bound them closer than either wanted to admit. Downstairs, Buddy barked again, louder this time, insistent. The sound carried up the stairwell, echoing against the marble. Margaret's brows knit. He never carries on like that. Because he knows, Maya said quickly. Dogs sense danger before we do. He's trying to warn you. Margaret shook her head, as if trying to chase away the suggestion, but she could not ignore the edge in her dog's voice. She pressed her hand to her temple, the beginnings of a headache forming. God help me. You're turning me into a paranoid woman. Maya wanted to answer, but a sound from the hall cut her off, a faint creak of floorboards. Someone was moving again. Both women stiffened. Margaret instinctively took a step closer to Maya, then caught herself and retreated, as if ashamed at the impulse. Maya pressed a finger to her lips, motioning for silence. Her bitten hand throbbed as she moved toward the door, ear tilted to the wood. A man's humming filtered through the lazy hum Jacob often made after a drink, a tune without melody, only arrogance. The sound chilled Maya's blood. He's outside, Maya whispered. Margaret's breath caught. She looked toward the window as if calculating an escape, but the storm outside made flight impossible. What do we do? She asked, the question tumbling out before she could stop herself. The shift in tone was not lost on Maya. For the first time, Margaret had asked her for guidance, though the words were wrapped in fear. Maya straightened, her voice calm but quiet. We wait, we keep the door locked, and we stay silent. Margaret's jaw tightened, pride wrestling with survival. She opened her mouth to argue, but the sound of Jacob's footsteps passing by silenced her. The office fell still again. After a long minute, Maya pulled back, her shoulders easing slightly. He's gone down the hall, she said. But he'll come back. He's circling. Margaret's legs seemed to weaken, and she lowered herself back into the chair. She pressed her fingers to her temples, whispering, "This can't be real." Maya crouched near her, careful to keep distance, her voice low and steady. I wish it wasn't. But pretending won't change it. Silence will. Margaret's eyes glistened with unshed tears. For a moment she looked older, her strength stripped bare by betrayal. She searched Maya's face as if trying to decide whether to trust the woman she had just called filthy. Maya lowered her gaze, speaking more to the room than to Margaret. All my life I've kept quiet to stay alive. Tonight, I'll keep quiet to keep you alive too. The words hung heavy, and Margaret had no reply. She turned her face toward the window again, staring out at the rain-slicked street where no one passed. The storm raged louder, but inside the mansion, silence carried the weight of truth unspoken. The clock ticked on, each second drawing them closer to a night that would demand choices neither woman was ready to make. And in that silence, both began to understand. Survival was no longer a private matter. It was shared now, bound together by fear, mistrust, and the storm that pressed against the windows like an uninvited guest. Maya sat back against the wall, closing her eyes for a moment, letting the silence settle into her bones. She knew silence was not peace. Tonight, silence was the line between life and death. And for the first time, she wondered if Margaret Hale, proud and untouchable, was willing to learn that lesson. Jacob Reed had always been a man who wore charm like a second skin. To the neighbors, he was the perfect Southern gentleman, tall, broad-shouldered, with silver at his temples that lent him an air of distinguished grace. He tipped his hat to old ladies at the corner cafe, bought rounds of bourbon for friends at the club, and carried Margaret's coat at charity galas with a practiced hand that made cameras flash with admiration. People liked Jacob. They called him steady, reliable, a man who had married well and stood by his wife's side. But masks can fit so snugly that even those closest forget they are masks at all. Down in the parlor, Jacob poured himself 2 fingers of bourbon from the crystal decanter. The storm outside rattled the French doors, but he didn't flinch. He stood in the dim light, swirling the amber liquid in his glass, humming that tuneless hum of his. To anyone watching, he might have seemed relaxed, a man enjoying a nightcap while his wife read upstairs. Only his eyes betrayed him hard, restless, shifting toward the ceiling as though measuring the distance between him and the prize he had nearly claimed. Maya crouched upstairs near the office door, straining to hear. She knew his rhythms now. The pour of bourbon, the deliberate steps, the creak of the leather armchair when he settled. She hated that she could map his habits as easily as she mapped the kitchen she scrubbed each morning. People thought wealth made lives mysterious, but it didn't. It only polished routines until they gleamed. Margaret sat at her desk, hands clenched around the arms of her chair. She had stopped snapping at Maya, but her distrust still simmered. "He sounds calm," she whispered bitterly. "Not at all the murderer you describe." Maya kept her voice low. "That's how he wants to sound, ma'am. Men like him don't show the knife until it's pressed against your ribs." Margaret shuddered. She hated the image, hated even more that it rang true. She thought of all the nights Jacob had come home smelling faintly of whiskey and ambition, smiling as though he carried the weight of her empire instead of feeding from it. She had always brushed away her doubts, reminding herself that appearances mattered. Now those appearances clung to her like cobwebs. Jacob drained his glass and set it down with a decisive clink. He rose and paced slowly across the parlor. His polished shoes echoed against the hardwood floor. He paused near the piano, touching the keys idly with a finger, producing a single discordant note that carried up the stairwell like a warning. Then he laughed quietly, a laugh that never reached his eyes. Maya caught her breath at the sound. Margaret did too. Their eyes met, and for the first time Margaret didn't look at her maid with contempt. She looked at her as another human being caught in the same storm. Fear equalized them in ways money never could. "I don't understand," Margaret whispered, her voice shaking. "Why now? Why after everything?" Maya leaned closer, her words heavy with conviction. "Because he thinks you're alone. No children. No family close by. No one to question. He thinks all the pieces are in his favor." Margaret bit her lip. The truth of it was too sharp to ignore. She thought of her empire, her fashion line built over decades, the partnerships in New York, the board meetings where her word had been law. She had faced competitors, critics, journalists eager to twist her failures. She had survived all of them. But here, in her own home, she faced the one enemy she had never prepared for, betrayal in her bed. The footsteps shifted again. Jacob was climbing the stairs. Each creak of wood echoed like a clock counting down. Margaret rose, panic flashing across her features. "He's coming," she hissed. Maya placed a hand gently on her arm. "Stay calm, stay silent. Let me speak if he finds us." Margaret recoiled instinctively from Maya's touch but didn't shake it off. She swallowed, nodding reluctantly. Her pride screamed at her, but her survival whispered louder. Jacob's steps grew louder, closer. He paused halfway up, as though listening for movement. Then, almost casually, he called out, "Margaret? Are you awake?" His tone was warm, concerned. dripping with the honeyed drawl of a man who wanted the world to believe in his devotion. Margaret opened her mouth, instinct pulling her to answer. Maya squeezed her arm sharply, shaking her head. Don't. There was silence again, thick and oppressive. Jacob lingered for a long moment, then continued up. His shoes reached the landing, and his shadow stretched across the upstairs hallway. Maya could see it flicker under the office door, long and sharp like a blade. He stopped outside the office. The handle jiggled lightly. Testing. Margaret? He asked again, softer now. Intimate, the way a man speaks in a lover's ear. I brought you something to help you sleep. Chamomile tea, your favorite. Margaret's lips trembled. Tears pooled in her eyes. She wanted so badly to believe in the ordinary comfort of his voice, the domestic lie of tea and concern. Maya held her breath, her entire body coiled with urgency. Jacob waited. The silence stretched. Then he sighed, almost theatrically, and walked on down the hall. His shadow vanished. His footsteps moved toward the master bedroom, the door opening with a creak before closing again. Margaret sagged back into her chair, her face pale. God, she whispered, clutching her chest. That was him. He really... She couldn't finish. Maya nodded. Now you hear what I hear, ma'am. The mask slipping. He wants you quiet, forever. Margaret pressed her palms against her face. She wanted to deny it, to push it back into the shadows. But the performance she had just witnessed, the gentle knock, the poisoned tea, was too cruel, too calculated. It wasn't the act of a husband. It was the act of a predator. Below them, Jacob settled into the master suite. The click of his belt buckle echoed faintly, the sound of him undressing for bed. But Maya knew better. The mask of the gentleman had only been adjusted, not removed. A man like Jacob never truly rested. Margaret lowered her hands at last, her eyes glistening. What do we do? She whispered, her voice trembling. Maya's answer was steady, though her stomach churned. We prepare. We watch. And when the time comes, we call for help. But not until we have proof strong enough that no one can ignore. Margaret stared at her, still torn between distrust and need, but the weight of silence pressed down on both of them. And deep in her heart, Margaret knew that her maid, the girl she had called filthy, was the only person standing between her and death. Downstairs, thunder boomed again, rattling the glass. And in the master bedroom, Jacob Reed lay awake in the dark, a smile curling his lips. For men who wear masks, storms are not threats. They are cover. The storm deepened after midnight, pushing sheets of rain against the shutters so fiercely that it sounded like fists pounding from the outside. The mansion groaned under the weight of wind. Upstairs, in the dim office lit only by a desk lamp, Maya kept her back against the door, as if her body alone could hold back the danger on the other side. Margaret sat rigid at her desk, every nerve on edge, her eyes fixed on the grain of the mahogany as though staring into wood would anchor her mind. Neither woman spoke for a long while. Silence pressed heavy, but it was different now. It was not simply mistrust between them, it was the silence of two people who had just heard the mask of a man crack. They both knew Jacob's voice, knew its rehearsed warmth, and they had both felt the chill of the performance he gave outside that door. A husband offering tea in the dead of night should have sounded tender. It had sounded like a trap. Maya shifted her weight, listening hard for signs in the hall. Jacob had retreated to the master suite, but his presence filled the house like humidity thick, suffocating, impossible to escape. She pictured him downstairs earlier, sipping bourbon with that smug hum, a man already writing his alibi in his head. She shuddered. Margaret finally broke the silence. I don't understand, she whispered. Why tonight? Why now? Her voice cracked at the edges. Unguarded for the first time, Maya drew a slow breath. Because storms are cover, ma'am. Nobody comes around in weather like this. If the lights go out and something happens to you, it will be blamed on exhaustion, maybe a fall down the stairs. People will accept it. Margaret's head snapped up. Her eyes widened, horrified. You think he'd make it look like an accident? Yes. Maya's voice was steady, though her heart pounded. That's how men like him survive. They make the world believe what it already expects. Margaret leaned back, pressing her hands over her face. For decades, she had commanded boardrooms, bent competitors with a glance, silenced critics with data, but none of that prepared her for the possibility that the man she had let closest was plotting her end. She lowered her hands slowly, eyes wet, and whispered, "I gave him everything." Maya felt a surge of pity but swallowed it. Pity would not save them. That's why he thinks he can take everything. He believes you'll never fight back. No. Margaret glared at her then, pride flashing like lightning. "You speak as if you know me, girl. You don't." Maya held her ground. "I know what I heard, and I know fear when I see it." Margaret's lips parted, ready to retort, but the sharp bark of Buddy from downstairs froze them both. The retriever's voice was frantic this time, urgent. His claws scrabbled against the tile, followed by a low, rumbling growl. Maya's eyes widened. Something's wrong. She leaned to the door, ear pressed to the wood. At first, only the storm answered. Then came the faint clink of glass, Jacob pouring another drink, or maybe not. The sound carried strangely in the mansion, bouncing off high ceilings and polished floors. Margaret rose to her feet, wringing her hands. "I can't sit here waiting like a prisoner." "You must," Maya urged. "That's what he expects to draw you out." But Margaret shook her head. "If I let him drive me to fear, he's already won. I won't live that way." Her defiance was admirable, but reckless. Maya stepped in front of her, blocking her path to the door. "Please, I know you don't trust me. You think I'm dirty, beneath you. Maybe you're right. But if you open that door tonight, you may never close it again." Margaret stared at her, torn between fury and dread. At last, she sank back into her chair with a frustrated cry, her composure cracking. She muttered under her breath, "God help me, I'm listening to the maid." Meh. Maya ignored the sting. The important thing was that Margaret had stayed put. Another sound drifted up the faint creak of the back staircase, the one servants used. Maya stiffened. Jacob rarely used that stair. It led directly to the kitchen and the side entrance, convenient for slipping out unseen. Her pulse quickened. Margaret heard it too. Her face drained of color. "What's he doing?" she whispered. Maya's mind raced, checking exits, making sure the house is sealed. She pressed her bitten hand tighter against her apron, ignoring the ache. "He's preparing." The thought chilled Margaret to her core. She thought of all the society friends who adored Jacob, the gala photographs, the way strangers admired them as a power couple. None of them would believe the truth if she ended up in the morgue. Her lips trembled. "No one will believe you," she said hollowly. "Not against him." Maya crouched beside her, voice fierce. "Then we gather proof. Words aren't enough. We need something he can't deny." Margaret blinked at her, torn between hope and despair. "And how do we get that?" Maya glanced at the desk. Margaret's phone lay charging, its screen dark. Slowly, she picked it up and opened the recording app. The glowing red button felt like a lifeline. She looked Margaret in the eye. "We make him speak his truth, and we capture it." Margaret hesitated, then gave the faintest nod. It was the first true moment of alliance between them. They waited, listening. The storm raged outside, thunder shaking the glass panes. Buddy barked again, then yelped as though shoved. Margaret gasped, hand to her mouth. Maya's blood ran cold. "He's testing boundaries," Maya whispered, "seeing if anyone reacts." Margaret's hands shook as she gripped the edge of the desk. "This is madness. My life reduced to waiting for a confession in my own house." Maya steadied her voice. "Better madness than death." They sat together in the dim room, the red light of the phone's recorder glowing faintly on the desk. Every sound in the house became sharper, the drip of water from a gutter, the groan of wood, the occasional shuffle of a shoe against tile. And through it all, Jacob's humming returned, drifting up the staircase like smoke. Margaret closed her eyes, whispering, "He sounds so normal. That's what terrifies me." Maya didn't answer. She tightened her grip on the phone, silently promising herself, whatever happened next, the mask Jacob Reed wore would crack wide open, and the world would finally see the shadow behind the gentleman. The red glow of the recorder lit the desk like a fragile ember. Maya's thumb hovered over it, her heart pounding in her chest. She had taken risks before, jobs where managers skimmed wages, men who thought silence meant consent, but nothing like this. This was life or death. She could feel it in her bones, the way you feel the pressure drop before a storm splits the sky. Margaret sat across from her, pale, her knuckles white against the arms of her chair. The earlier disdain still lingered in her eyes, but it was cracked now, softened by the weight of fear. Her gaze flicked to the phone, then back to Maya. "If you're wrong," she whispered, "I'll never forgive you." "If I'm wrong," Maya said quietly, "I'll leave tomorrow and you'll never see me again. But if I'm right, tonight might be the only chance to keep you breathing." Margaret swallowed hard. The storm outside howled louder, rattling the shutters like hands trying to break in. For a moment, neither spoke. They only listened to the storm, to their own heartbeats, and to the subtle, unnerving silence of Jacob's absence. Then came the sound, footsteps again, deliberate, heavy but unhurried. He was moving down the hall toward the office. Buddy barked frantically downstairs, claws clicking against the tile. A sharp command silenced him, Jacob's voice, low and firm. The dog whimpered, then went quiet. Margaret flinched. "Oh God," she whispered. Maya raised a hand, signaling silence. She turned the phone screen downward to hide its glow, then pressed record. Her bitten hand throbbed with every heartbeat, but she held still, every muscle coiled. The doorknob turned, slowly, deliberately. The bolt caught, holding the door shut, but the handle jiggled with quiet persistence. Then Jacob's voice slid through the crack. Warm, honeyed, perfectly rehearsed. "Margaret, are you awake, darling?" Margaret's lips parted, instinct tugging her to answer. Maya shot her a look, fierce, eyes burning with urgency. She mouthed the words that had begun this night. "Don't speak." Margaret pressed her lips together, trembling. Jacob waited, then chuckled softly. "You've been working too hard. I told you. You need to rest. I made tea. Just a little chamomile. It will help you sleep." The words dripped through the door like poison wrapped in silk. Maya's stomach turned. She glanced at the phone, watching the sound waves spike as his voice filled the recorder. Proof. Every syllable was proof. Jacob pressed the handle again, harder this time. "Why is this door locked? You never lock it." "Margaret, open up. Let me in. You know I worry about you." Margaret's eyes filled with tears. She shook her head in tiny jerks, lips pressed tight to keep herself from answering. Her entire body trembled. Maya placed a steadying hand on her arm, whispering so softly it barely rose above breath. "Stay strong. He wants you to give yourself away." The handle stilled. For a moment, silence. Then Jacob's sigh, theatrical, calculated. "All right, if you won't let me in, we'll talk tomorrow. But you mustn't drive yourself like this. Everyone sees how tired you are." It wouldn't surprise anyone if he let the sentence trail, unfinished but loaded. Maya felt a chill race down her spine. Her grip tightened on Margaret's arm, as if to anchor her to the chair. The phone captured every word, the cruel artistry of it. Jacob tapped the door lightly, almost a knock, almost a caress. Then his footsteps receded down the hall. A door closed somewhere, maybe the master suite, maybe another room. The silence that followed was heavier than the storm. Margaret exhaled in a shudder, tears spilling at last. She covered her face with her hands. "My God, he really means it." Her voice broke. "All these years, and this is who I married." Maya stopped the recording, saved it, and set the phone gently on the desk. She crouched in front of Margaret, her voice steady despite the adrenaline still racing through her. "Now you know. Now it's not just my word. It's his. We have him." Margaret lifted her head, eyes red, face pale. "Do you think anyone will listen? A jury? The police?" "They will if we make it through tonight," Maya said. "Tomorrow, you can hand them this recording. But tonight, we stay quiet. We wait until morning." Margaret stared at her, then laughed bitterly, broken. "Wait until morning? In my own house? Do you know how insane that sounds?" Maya held her gaze, unflinching. "It sounds insane because the truth is insane. But it's survival." The words seemed to reach Margaret in a way nothing else had. She leaned back in her chair, closing her eyes, tears streaking down her cheeks. I feel like a prisoner in my own home. Maya sat back against the wall, her own body trembling from exhaustion and fear. Sometimes prisons are safer than open doors. For a while, neither spoke. The clock on the mantel ticked toward 1 a.m., each second dragging. The storm raged on, battering the shutters. Every creak of the house, every shift of the wind, made them flinch. But Jacob did not return to the office. Margaret finally spoke, voice hoarse. I thought I knew him. I thought I knew what love was. I built an empire, but I never built a family. And now I see why. She let out a long, shaking breath. Maybe I was blind all along. Maya wanted to comfort her, but she knew words could only do so much. Instead, she said simply, "You're alive. That's what matters." Margaret opened her eyes, meeting Maya's steady gaze. Something shifted then, still mistrust, still pride, but also the faint spark of respect. "You may have saved my life tonight," she whispered. Maya looked away, embarrassed. "Let's get through the rest of it before we say that." The storm roared. The old mansion shuddered. And in the office, two women sat bound together by silence and fear, waiting for dawn, with a recording on a phone that might be the only proof of the darkness behind Jacob Reed's gentleman mask. The hours after 1 o'clock crawled like a wounded animal, limping through the silence of the house. The storm outside kept its furious tempo, lashing the windows with rain, but inside the mansion the air grew heavier, staler, as if the very walls were listening. Maya sat with her back against the door, her knees drawn close, the phone still hidden in her lap. Every time she looked at the recording app, she felt both relief and dread. Proof, yes, but also a target. If Jacob ever realized what she'd captured, he wouldn't hesitate to silence her. Margaret had moved to the window again, staring out at the street lamp that flickered against the rain. Her silk blouse clung damp to her arms. Fear made her sweat, though she tried to disguise it with poise. She had wiped her tears, straightened her posture, and forced her face back into the mask of a woman in control. But her voice betrayed her when she finally spoke. "Do you know how this looks, Maya? A maid spinning tales in the middle of the night. A hysterical dog, a storm, and a frightened employer who let herself be carried away by shadows." Maya bristled, but she kept her tone measured. "You heard him yourself, ma'am. You heard what he said at that door." "Vree." Margaret turned, her eyes sharp but unsteady. Words can be twisted. Maybe he meant exhaustion as in stress. Maybe the tea really was chamomile. "You push me to believe the worst, but maybe the worst is in your imagination." Maya rose to her feet, her bitten hand cradled close. Then why did he come with the tea after midnight, whispering through a locked door? Why did he test the handle like a thief instead of knocking like a husband? Margaret flinched at the memory but held her ground. Perhaps he was trying not to disturb me. Perhaps, she broke off, her voice cracking. "God, what am I doing? Defending him to you?" Maya softened, stepping closer but keeping a careful distance. "Because you love him, because you built your life around believing in him. That doesn't make you weak, it just makes you human." The words hit Margaret harder than any accusation. Her chin wavered, but she forced it steady. "I am not weak." "I know," Maya said gently. "That's why you're still here." "Mander." They stared at each other in the half-light, the storm groaning outside. For the first time, something fragile passed between them, not trust, not yet, but a truce against the greater threat that stalked the halls. A sudden thud from below shattered the moment. Both women froze. It wasn't the creak of wood or the shuffle of shoes. This time it was a deliberate crash, like a glass shattering against the floor. Buddy barked furiously, claws scratching the tile. Margaret gasped. "What was that?" Maya strained her ears. Another crash. Louder this time, followed by Jacob's voice. Sharp and commanding. "Quiet, damn it. Quiet." Then silence, broken only by the dog's whimper. Margaret staggered back into her chair, her hand pressed to her mouth. "He's hurting Buddy." Her voice broke. "He's never..." Maya clenched her fists. She wanted to run downstairs, to snatch the dog away. But logic held her. "That's not about the dog. That's about us. He's trying to rattle you. Make you open the door." Margaret's eyes brimmed with tears. She shook her head violently. No, no, he wouldn't. He wouldn't hurt the dog. He loves. Stop. Maya cut in firmly. Don't lie to yourself now. If he can plan to kill you, he can kick a dog. Margaret shuddered, collapsing back against the chair. I can't bear this. I can't sit here, silent, while he— You have to, Maya said, kneeling beside her. You have to bear it, or you won't live to see another sunrise. That's the truth. Margaret covered her face with her hands, muffling a sob. For decades she had carried herself like marble, flawless and cold. Now the cracks were showing. Raw and human. Maya reached out instinctively, then pulled back, remembering the slap and the bite from earlier. Touch wasn't welcome here, not yet. The house fell quiet again, but not peacefully. It was the quiet of a predator waiting. Maya could feel it in her chest. Jacob wasn't finished. He was adjusting, plotting his next move. Margaret lowered her hands at last, her face streaked with tears but her voice steadier. You keep telling me to trust you. But tell me, Maya, why are you doing this? Why risk yourself for me? You could walk out tonight, leave me to my fate, and no one would blame you. Maya met her gaze, because silence has already stolen too much from me. My mother died in silence. My father left in silence. I won't stand by and let silence take you too. Margaret stade here, stunne. The storm boomed outside, but inside the room there was a different thunder, a collision of two lives from opposite worlds. Finally, Margaret whispered, I don't know if I believe you, but I can't deny what I've seen tonight. If I survive this, I'll owe you more than I can pay. Maya shook her head. Don't think about owing me. Think about staying alive. A long silence followed. Then Margaret nodded, slowly, reluctantly. It was the first sign of surrender, the first crack in the wall of doubt. But just as Maya felt a flicker of relief, a new sound reached them, one that made her blood run cold. From the hall came the faintest scrape, like metal against wood. Jacob was back at the door, testing it again, this time with something sharper than his hand. Maya pressed a finger to her lips. Margaret froze, eyes wide, her breath caught in her throat. The scraping grew louder, more insistent. The bolt trembled in its housing. Jacob's voice came soft, almost tender. Margaret, unlock the door, please. Don't make this harder than it has to be. Margaret's hand flew to her mouth to stifle a cry. Maya reached for the phone, her thumb steady on the recorder. The storm outside raged, but it was nothing compared to the storm now pressing against the office door. And in that moment, Margaret Hale finally understood. Doubt would no longer save her. Only silence and the truth it carried could. The sound of metal scraping against the lock slithered into the room, sharper than the lightning outside. Margaret clutched the arms of her chair, her nails biting into polished wood, her breath caught like a bird trapped in a cage. Maya pressed her back harder against the door, her body a barrier that felt laughably small against the force on the other side. The storm lashed the mansion, windows rattling as though they might shatter at any second. But the true storm was here, inside, wrapped in silk pajamas and a husband's voice dripping with poison. Margaret, Jacob's drawl slid through the crack, low and coaxing, as if the door were merely a wall between lovers quarreling. Don't make this harder. You've been under strain. Everyone sees it. No one would blame you for being tired. Open the door and let me help you. Maya pressed her finger to her lips and locked her eyes on Margaret. The woman was trembling, sweat gleaming at her hairline despite the chill draft seeping through the shutters. Margaret shook her head violently, mouthing words without sound. I can't do this. You can, Maya whispered, barely moving her lips. You have to. She pressed the phone tighter to her chest, recording everything. The scraping stopped. Silence fell. But it wasn't relief, it was worse. The predator had withdrawn, but not out of mercy. Maya knew the silence of hunters. It was the silence of recalculation. Her father used to say the scariest man in a fight wasn't the one who shouted, it was the one who smiled. Jacob was smiling somewhere in the dark. She could feel it. Thunder rolled across the garden district, shaking the glass panes. Lightning illuminated the office for a brief second, casting long shadows of both women against the wall. Margaret's shadow trembled. Maya's stood rigid, squared at the door, Then came a new sound, footsteps retreating down the hall, slow and unhurried, as if Jacob had all the time in the world. Buddy barked once, a sharp, warning note, before yelping again. Then silence. Margaret's composure cracked. She shot to her feet, pacing the length of the rug. He's going to kill the dog. He'll kill him just to punish me. Her voice broke into a sob she tried to choke back. Maya stood too, catching her by the arms. Listen to me. That's what he wants. He wants you frantic. If you open that door, if you run down those stairs, he wins. Buddy wouldn't want that. Margaret jerked away, her eyes blazing. You don't get to tell me what my dog wants. But even as she shouted, her body shook. Anger was a mask, thinner than Jacob's, and it cracked almost immediately. She sank back into the chair, covering her face with her hands. This is madness. I'm hiding in my own house, listening to my husband torment us like a stranger. Maya crouched in front of her, lowering her voice until it was firm but gentle. Yes, and if you want to see tomorrow, you'll keep hiding. Sometimes survival means swallowing pride. Margaret lowered her hands, staring at her maid. Her lip curled in a sneer she didn't fully believe. Spoken like someone who's used to crawling. Maya's face flushed, but she didn't rise to the insult. Spoken like someone who's still alive. Oh, their eyes locked, and for a moment, Margaret saw not a maid but a woman forged in places she'd never set foot, a woman who had learned hard lessons about what silence and patience could cost. That realization unsettled her more than Jacob's voice at the door. Another boom of thunder rattled the chandelier. The lights flickered, then died, plunging the office into darkness. Margaret gasped. The power. Shh. Maya fumbled for the flashlight she'd stashed in the closet earlier. She clicked it on, casting a pale beam across the room. Shadows leapt and twisted. Margaret's face appeared hollow, her cheekbones sharp in the glow, her eyes wide and wet. Somewhere below, a door slammed. Jacob was moving with more force now, no longer whispering behind masks. The performance was ending. The real man was stepping into the storm. Margaret clutched the armrest again, her knuckles bone white. What if he breaks in? Maya steadied the flashlight, her voice calm. Then he'll have to go through me first. Margaret almost laughed, but it came out as a sob. You're half his size. What do you think you can do? Maya's jaw tightened. What I've always done. Endure. Outsmart. Survive. The words settled in the room, stronger than the storm. For a long beat, neither woman moved. The only sound was the relentless rain and the occasional distant groan of the house. Then, faintly, the sound of Jacob's humming drifted up the stairs. That tuneless, smug hum. It seeped under the door, wrapped around their nerves, and made the hairs on their arms stand upright. He was letting them know he hadn't gone far. He was circling. Margaret whispered, "He's toying with us." "Yes," Maya replied, "which means he hasn't decided how to strike yet. That gives us time." Margaret closed her eyes, tears leaking despite her effort to stay strong. "I don't know if I can keep this up all night." Maya set the flashlight on the desk, letting its beam angle toward the ceiling. She pulled the chair closer, lowering herself beside Margaret. "You can," she said softly, "because you're stronger than you think, and because you're not alone." The older woman looked at her sharply, but something in Maya's voice made her pause. For the first time that night, she didn't recoil from her maid's nearness. She simply nodded, small and hesitant. They sat together, shoulder to shoulder, though their worlds had never touched before this night. Outside, the storm pounded New Orleans with fury. Inside, another storm churned fear, betrayal, pride, and the fragile thread of trust binding two women who had never imagined they'd need each other. And in the hallway, Jacob Reed hummed his tuneless song, waiting for the silence to break. The humming stopped. For a long stretch of seconds, only the storm filled the silence, rattling the windows and shaking the old bones of the mansion. Margaret's chest rose and fell in shallow bursts, every breath trembling. Maya angled the flashlight beam toward the door, her bitten hand tight around the phone that had already captured so much. Her body was taut, every nerve strung like wire. She knew he was there, just beyond the wood, waiting. Then came the whisper, "Margaret, The voice was so soft it barely reached through the crack, but it sank into the room like a serpent slipping under a doorframe. "I know you're awake. I can hear you breathing." Margaret flinched, a muffled whimper breaking from her throat. Maya's eyes cut toward her sharply, warning her into silence. She mouthed the words again. "Don't speak." The same words that had sparked this night's fragile alliance. Jacob's whisper grew smoother, like silk pulled tight. "You've locked yourself away. That isn't like you. Are you upset with me, darling? Let me in. We'll talk." A faint tap followed, knuckles brushing the wood like a lover's caress. Margaret shook her head violently, mouthing back at Maya, "I can't do this." Her hands clutched the chair as though it were the only anchor keeping her upright. Maya leaned close, her lips barely moving. "You can. Stay with me. He can't win if you don't answer." "Now," the whisper returned, lower now, edged with something harder. "Don't make me knock again. You'll frighten yourself. Just let me in, Margaret. It's better this way." Maya set the phone on the desk, pressing record again. The red light blinked faintly, casting a glow that felt almost defiant. Every word he spoke became another nail in the coffin of his gentleman mask. Proof. Unshakable, undeniably proof. Jacob shifted, his weight leaning against the door. The hinges groaned. The bolt shuddered. "You don't trust me anymore? After all these years?" He chuckled, low and humorless. "You'll regret that." Margaret's face crumpled. She pressed both hands against her mouth, fighting the cry clawing its way up her throat. Maya placed her hand over Margaret's trembling fingers, steadying them, forcing the sound back down. Their eyes locked, and for the first time, Margaret didn't recoil from her touch. The footsteps retreated suddenly. 1, 2, 3 steps down the hall, then silence again. Margaret exhaled shakily, her eyes closing in brief relief. But Maya didn't relax. She knew the patterns of hunters. They withdrew not to surrender, but to circle. A minute later, another sound reached them, a soft scrape near the baseboard. Margaret's eyes shot open. "What is that?" she mouthed. Maya tilted her head, listening. The scrape grew into a faint sliding sound, like metal dragged against wood. Her stomach knotted. "He's trying the vents," she whispered, "testing if he can hear us through them." Margaret looked at her in horror. "That's insane." "No," Maya said flatly. "That's calculated." The scrape stopped. Then Jacob's voice drifted faintly from the hall again, no longer whispering but pitched in casual tones, as if speaking to himself. "She's tired. Everyone knows she's tired. She works too hard. Too much stress for one woman. No one would question." He let the words float deliberately, knowing they would carry through the gaps of the old house. Margaret's nails dug into the armrest. "He's rehearsing it," she whispered, disbelief and terror mixing. "He's rehearsing what he'll tell them." Maya pointed to the phone. "And we're recording it." The storm boomed, thunder splitting the air so violently the walls quivered. In that moment, the two women sat frozen in the office, listening to the man who was supposed to be husband and protector plan his cover story. Proof, yes. But proof was useless if they didn't live to deliver it. Margaret suddenly rose, pacing in frantic circles. I can't just sit here. He's everywhere. He's in the walls, in my head. If I scream, if I run, at least it ends." Maya stood quickly, intercepting her path. "No, that's what he wants. He wants you desperate enough to expose yourself." Margaret spun, eyes blazing with a mix of rage and despair. "You don't understand what it's like to realize the person you trusted most wants you dead." Maya's voice hardened. "You're wrong. I understand exactly. My father left us when I was 10. He promised my mother he'd come back. Swore he loved us. Instead, he emptied her savings and vanished. She died believing silence was safer than truth. So don't tell me I don't understand betrayal. I've lived it." Margaret froze, her breath catching. The storm rattled the glass behind her, but the room itself fell still. Slowly, she lowered her eyes, her pride softening in the face of another woman's truth. "I don't know how to survive this," she admitted, her voice trembling. I know how to win in business. I know how to crush competitors. But this is, her voice broke. This is my own house, my own husband. Maya steadied her with a look. Then you learn a new game. You survive tonight. You take the power back tomorrow, but only if you stay quiet now. Margaret stared at her, then nodded shakily. For the first time, it was obedience without insult, without disdain. It was survival. From the hall came the sound of footsteps again. Jacob lingered outside, humming once more, louder this time, letting the notes bleed through the door. Then, after a long pause, he spoke in a voice dripping with false affection. I'll wait. You can't hide forever. His shoes clicked against the hardwood, moving away. A door slammed at the far end of the hall. Margaret collapsed into the chair, burying her face in her hands. Maya stopped the recording and saved it, her hands trembling but her resolve steel. She set the phone down, her voice low but fierce. We're not hiding forever, we're fighting, just not on his terms. Margaret lifted her face, pale and streaked with tears. Her lips trembled, but she whispered, Then tell me what to do. The storm howled outside. The mansion trembled. And for the first time, Margaret Hale, the woman who had built an empire and commanded 100 boardrooms, looked to her maid not as an employee, but as the only ally left between her and the man who had vowed, with silk and poison, to end her life. The storm outside raged like it had sworn vengeance on the city, hammering rain against the shutters, making the tall oaks groan and sway. Inside the office, Margaret sat with her arms wrapped tightly around herself, her eyes red from tears, her pride cracked in places she had never allowed before. Maya stood over her, clutching the phone, its recording app still open and glowing faintly in the dark. The house had fallen quiet for the moment. Jacob's footsteps had retreated to some far corner of the mansion, but the silence felt like the pause of a predator catching its breath. Margaret looked at the phone and then at Maya. Her lips trembled. Proof is one thing, but who will hear it? He has friends, influence, people who'd never believe me. Maya's thumb hovered over the screen, but not on the recorder this time. She tapped the green icon with quiet decisiveness. Someone who has to believe. 911. Margaret's breath caught. Number you can't. He'll hear us. If he knows. Maya silenced her with a look, her voice a steady whisper. We whisper. We say just enough. They'll trace the call. Her bitten hand trembled as she dialed. The ring barely lasted a second, before a calm female voice answered. 911. What's your emergency? Maya cupped her hand over the phone, crouched low behind the desk, her voice no louder than the storm's breath through the shutters. This is Maya Williams, Garden District, Hale residence. Husband intends to kill his wife. He's in the house now. Margaret's hand flew to her mouth. Her eyes were wide, terrified, but not of Jacob this time, of the risk, of the sound carrying through the walls. The operator's voice sharpened with focus. Are you safe right now? Can you stay hidden? Maya whispered. Yes. We're locked in the upstairs office. He tried the door. He's waiting. Stay quiet, the operator instructed, her tone calm but urgent. Officers are en route. Keep the line open if you can, but don't speak unless absolutely necessary. Can you do that? Yes, Maya breathed, then lowered the phone so the microphone could still pick up without their lips brushing the receiver. Margaret pressed close to her, whispering in panic. They won't get here in time. He'll hear them. He'll know. Maya steadied her with a hand on her arm. They'll come. You just have to hold on. The storm gave them cover, a constant roar that masked their shallow breaths. But every creak of the mansion felt magnified. A floorboard groaned somewhere in the distance. Margaret stiffened. Maya tightened her grip on the phone. The operator's voice came through again, soft and patient. Ma'am, I need you to stay calm. Can you tell me if you're injured? Do you have any weapons? Maya shook her head, then realized she had to answer. She leaned close. No weapons. He may have something. Not sure. Please, hurry. Margaret stared at her, lips trembling, her breath uneven. She mouthed, He'll kill us before they get here. Maya mouthed back firmly, not if we stay silent. Below them, Jacob's humming started again. This time it was closer. He was in the stairwell, rising slowly, each step deliberate. Margaret nearly whimpered, but Maya pressed a steadying hand against her shoulder, grounding her. The humming stopped. Then Jacob's voice floated up, casual, conversational, as though he were speaking to the walls. I poured the tea out. Shame. Would have helped you sleep, but maybe you're too far gone already. Maybe you're not yourself anymore. Margaret's body trembled violently. The operator's voice whispered through the phone. Is that him? Do not answer. Officers are close. Maya's heart pounded. She closed her eyes briefly, centering herself. Every second felt like a lifetime. She remembered her mother's voice from years ago. Fill your lungs, child. Empty lungs make bad decisions. She drew a deep, steady breath. Jacob reached the top landing. His footsteps crossed the hall and stopped directly outside the office. The knob rattled, the bolt holding fast. Then came a long silence, broken only by the storm. Margaret's hand slipped into Maya's, gripping so tightly it hurt. For a woman who once despised her touch, the gesture spoke volumes. Maya squeezed back, silently promising. I won't let him through. The operator whispered again. Units are 2 minutes out. Stay with me. Ma. Jacob's shadow stretched under the door. He lingered there, silent. Then he spoke, softly, venom wrapped in silk. You think you're safe in there, Margaret? You're not. You'll never be safe from the truth. The phone recorded it all. Margaret sobbed quietly into her sleeve, but the sound was swallowed by thunder. Maya pressed a finger to her lips, urging her to silence. Finally, Jacob moved away. His steps faded back down the hall, slow, measured, a man who wanted them to know he wasn't rushing. He had time. He had all night. The office sank into a tense stillness. The operator's voice came again, calm and steady. They're on your street. Stay hidden. Do not unlock that door until the police identify themselves. Do you understand? Maya whispered. Yes, we understand. Margaret collapsed back into the chair, tears streaming freely now. She buried her face in her hands, whispering into the storm. Oh God, please let them get here before he does. Maya stayed crouched, the phone pressed close, her ears tuned to every sound beyond the office door. The storm outside beat the city into submission. But in this mansion, the real tempest was waiting in the shadows, wearing the mask of a husband. And all they could do was cling to silence, cling to each other, and cling to the thin, crackling lifeline of a voice on the other end of the 911 line. The storm was still pounding the garden district when the first flicker of blue and red pierced through the sheeting rain outside. It flashed against the curtains in the office like distant lightning, faint but unmistakable. Margaret lurched to her feet, clutching the window frame, her breath fogging the glass. They're here, she whispered, her voice breaking with both relief and fear. Thank God, they're here. Maya didn't move from her position by the door. Her bitten hand, still raw and swollen, pressed firmly against the phone, the recording app still glowing faintly. She knew better than to celebrate too soon. Quiet, she whispered firmly. He doesn't know yet. If he hears the sirens first, he'll change. Oh, as if on cue, Jacob's voice floated up the stairwell, smoother than bourbon poured over ice. What's this? He drawled, feigning curiosity. A storm and now the city's finest at our doorstep? Strange night. His footsteps echoed against the hardwood floor, unhurried, strolling toward the foyer. Margaret trembled at the window, watching as 2 patrol cars slid to a stop under the sprawling oaks, their lights splashing color against the rain. Officers climbed out, raincoats glistening, hats pulled low. They moved with purpose, their radios crackling faintly. For a moment, Margaret believed it was over, that safety had finally breached the walls of her home. Then Jacob laughed. It was soft, but it carried. They'll believe me before they believe you. A stressed wife, a tired maid. That's all they'll see. Margaret turned from the window, horrified. He'll charm them, she whispered. He always charms them. Maya stood slowly, her shoulders squared, her eyes burning with resolve. Not tonight. Tonight we have proof. She lifted the phone like a weapon, the recordings glowing on the screen. His own words. His mask is already cracked. Margaret stared at her, torn between dread and fragile hope. She had lived her life in boardrooms, where power and persuasion bent truth like clay. She knew how easily a man like Jacob could spin a story, but for the first time, she felt the anchor of something stronger than his charm: evidence. The doorbell rang, muffled by the storm. A booming knock followed, accompanied by a commanding voice. "New Orleans Police Department." Jacob called down from the landing, his voice rich with false warmth. "Evening, officers. What brings you out on a night like this?" He descended the stairs with a casual ease that chilled Margaret to her core. She could see him in her mind's eye, shirt open at the collar, smile practiced, a glass of bourbon still in his hand as though he'd been interrupted mid-sip. The officers' voices drifted in, firm but polite. "Sir, we received a distress call from this residence. We need to check on everyone inside." Margaret's nails dug into the window frame. "He'll keep them downstairs. He'll never let them reach us." Maya's jaw tightened. "Then we make them hear us." She grabbed the flashlight, clicked it off, and then back on again, over and over, sending frantic bursts of light through the slit in the curtains. Blue outside met white inside, flashing together like a secret code. Downstairs, Jacob's voice sharpened. "There's been a mistake. My wife's been under strain. Our maid, too. Storm's got everyone on edge. I assure you, everything's fine." "Sir, we'll still need to see your wife," one officer replied. Margaret's knees weakened. "He won't let them. He'll lie until they leave." She turned to Maya, her pride stripped bare, her fear raw. "What do we do?" Maya clenched her teeth, her heart racing. "We make noise at the right time." She pressed the phone into Margaret's hands. "Hold it tight. If they get upstairs, play the recording. Don't hesitate." Margaret stared at the device as if it were dynamite. She nodded shakily. Below, the conversation grew tense. Jacob's voice rose, still polite but firm. "I said she's fine. She's sleeping. I won't have you barging into my home at this hour. Come back tomorrow with a warrant." Maya cursed under her breath. He was winning them over. She could hear the hesitation in the officers' voices, the professional patience edging toward retreat. Then Buddy barked loud, desperate. A raw plea from the kitchen. The dog's claws scraped furiously against the tile, followed by a sharp yelp. Margaret gasped, clutching the phone to her chest. "He's hurting him again." "Man," the officers reacted. "Sir, we need to enter now." Jacob's mask cracked. His voice lost its silk. "Stay out." The words thundered through the house, ugly and raw, a sound that stripped away his charm in a single moment. Maya seized her chance. She grabbed Margaret's hand and pulled her toward the door. "Now," she whispered. "Now they'll listen." Margaret's eyes widened in terror. "If we open the door." "We don't open. We shout." Maya pressed her lips close to the crack of the door, her voice strong and clear despite the storm. "Help us! Upstairs! He's trying to kill her!" The house froze. Silence fell heavy, punctuated only by the storm and Buddy's whimper. Then came the scramble of boots on the porch, radios sparking to life. Code red, possible domestic homicide attempt, officers requesting immediate backup. Margaret sank against the desk, tears spilling as relief and terror collided. For the first time, she believed the walls of her home could no longer contain Jacob's lies. Below, Jacob roared, a sound more beast than man. "Shut up." His footsteps thundered up the stairs, fast, unrestrained now. Margaret clutched the phone like salvation. Maya braced herself against the door, heart pounding, voice fierce. "Stay back, ma'am. Let him come to me first." The storm outside wailed as blue lights flared brighter against the rain. Inside, Jacob Reed charged toward the office, his mask shattered, his rage unveiled, the predator at last exposed. Jacob's footsteps thundered up the stairs, each strike a drumbeat of rage that rattled the old mansion. The storm outside clashed in rhythm, lightning tearing the sky, thunder rolling in its wake. But it was the storm inside that made Margaret stagger back, clutching the phone to her chest. Her lips trembled. Her breath came in shallow bursts. The polished marble queen of society had been stripped down to something raw, terrified, human. Maya planted herself at the office door, shoulders squared, palms flat against the wood. She could feel the vibration of Jacob's charge before he even reached the landing. Her bitten hand throbbed, but she pressed harder, her body the only barricade between Margaret and the man who once promised forever. From below came the bark of officers' commands, sharp, urgent, cutting through the storm. "Sir, step away from the stairs. Step back now." Radios crackled, boots pounded against tile, the unmistakable rise of authority crashing into the night. But Jacob didn't stop. His voice roared through the hall, shorn of its charm. "Margaret, open this damn door before I tear it down." The knob rattled violently, the bolt quivering in its housing. Maya leaned her full weight into the wood, her breath ragged, her heart hammering. She whispered without turning, "Stay back, ma'am. Don't move. Don't speak." Margaret's tears blurred her vision as she pressed herself against the desk. The phone in her hands felt both impossibly light and impossibly heavy. She could hear the recording waiting inside it, Jacob's own words damning him, but she feared the device might shatter if she clutched it any tighter. Another crash shook the door as Jacob slammed his shoulder into it. The hinges groaned. Margaret screamed before she could stop herself, the sound muffled by the storm but sharp enough to echo through the house. "Up here," an officer shouted from below. "They're upstairs." Jacob cursed violently, the words spitting out like venom. He slammed the door again, the bolt strained, metal screeching. Maya gritted her teeth, pressing harder, her entire body a wall of desperate defiance. "Stay down," Maya hissed over her shoulder. "If he gets in, crawl under the desk and don't stop recording. Do you hear me?" Margaret sobbed, but nodded, collapsing to the floor, sliding beneath the desk with the phone glowing faintly in her trembling hands. Another slam. The door cracked near the frame, splinters snapping loose. Margaret covered her mouth to smother another cry. Maya braced, knowing the next hit might break it open. Then, through the chaos, came the sharp bark of police commands. "Mr. Reed, step away from the door. Hands where we can see them." For the first time, Jacob hesitated. His breath came ragged through the crack, animal and furious. "She's hysterical," he bellowed. "She doesn't know what she's saying. It's the storm, the strain. She needs help. Not this circus." Maya shouted back, her voice raw with fury and survival. "We have recordings. We have proof." She pressed her mouth near the crack, her voice aimed at the hall, at the uniforms she couldn't see. "He said he would kill her. It's all recorded on this phone." A beat of silence followed. Then an officer's voice, steel sharp. "Sir, step away now. We're coming through." Jacob growled, a sound that made Margaret curl tighter beneath the desk. "Lies. She's a maid. Nothing but a jealous maid trying to poison my wife against me." Maya slammed her palm against the door, shouting louder. "Then why are we locked in here while he tries to break us down? Ask yourself that." "Well." The pause on the other side ended with the shuffle of boots, the clatter of metal against wood. "Breach it," an officer ordered. The next second exploded with force. The door shuddered as a battering ram slammed into it. Jacob cursed again, retreating a step. Another strike, wood cracking, the bolt tearing free. The door burst inward, knocking Maya back against the floor. Rain-slicked uniforms surged into the hall, flashlights slicing through the dark. "Hands up, get on the ground." The officers barked, their weapons drawn. Jacob froze, his face twisted in a mask of fury and disbelief. "This is my house. My wife is sick, and you're falling for a maid's lies?" Margaret crawled out from beneath the desk, trembling but resolute. Her hair clung damp to her cheeks, her eyes wild but fierce. She held the phone high, her voice cracking but loud. "He tried to kill me. It's on here. Everything he said, it's on this phone." Flashlights swung toward her. One officer stepped quickly to her side, steadying her by the arm. "Ma'am, are you hurt?" Margaret shook her head violently, thrusting the phone toward them. "Take it. Take it. It has his voice, his plan. Proof." Jacob lunged forward, his hand outstretched. "That's mine. She's delusional." A beam of light pinned him. "Step back," an officer barked. "Now." For a moment, Jacob hesitated, calculating, the mask twitching back onto his face. He forced a smile, the kind that had fooled boardrooms and charity galas for years. "Gentlemen, I assure you, This is a misunderstanding. My wife is fragile tonight. She's tired, overworked. You can see how hysterical she looks. That maid has filled her head with nonsense." Margaret's voice sliced through the storm, hoarse but fierce. "Stop calling me fragile. Stop calling me hysterical. You wanted me dead, Jacob, and now everyone knows it." Maya rose slowly from the floor, her body shaking but her voice steady. "Check the phone. Don't listen to him, listen to his own words." The officers exchanged sharp glances. One of them took the device carefully from Margaret, pressing the screen. Jacob's voice filled the hall smooth at first, coaxing through the crack, then slipping into venom and rage. No one would question. It would look natural. The sound hung heavy, undeniable. Jacob's face paled, the mask collapsing. That's out of context," he stammered. She twisted it, but the storm outside swallowed his excuses. The officers closed in, their voices firm, their commands sharp. "Turn around, hands behind your back." For the first time, Jacob Reed faltered. The mask he had worn for decades shattered fully. Rage twisted into desperation as they forced his arms behind him, the clink of metal cuffs sealing his fate. Margaret collapsed into the chair, her whole body shaking. Maya stood near her, her bitten hand bleeding again from the strain, but her eyes burned with something fierce and unyielding. The storm outside raged on. But inside, for the first time that night, there was a fragile, trembling sense of justice breaking through. Margaret turned her face toward Maya, her lips parting as if to speak, but no words came. The woman who had once called her filthy now looked at her with something closer to awe and gratitude that words could never fully contain. Maya lowered herself beside her, whispering, "Don't speak, ma'am. Not yet. Save your voice for tomorrow." Outside, blue lights pulsed against the rain-soaked streets, a signal to the city that the mask of a gentleman had fallen, and the truth had finally spoken louder than silence. The storm finally began to loosen its grip on New Orleans, the rain thinning into ragged curtains, thunder drifting farther down the river. But inside the Hale mansion, the echoes of the night still clung to every wall, every floorboard, every shadow. Blue and red lights bled through the high windows, flashing across the velvet drapes and antique paintings. Uniformed officers moved carefully through the halls, speaking in low voices, their boots squeaking against the polished wood. The house that once projected wealth and pride now looked like the scene of a crime, its grandeur stripped bare by the harsh pulse of emergency lights. Margaret sat in the office chair, her silk blouse wrinkled, her hair damp with sweat, her eyes hollow yet unblinking. She hadn't moved since Jacob was taken down the stairs in handcuffs, his shouts of protest and lies swallowed by the storm outside. For the first time in her adult life, Margaret Hale, businesswoman, socialite, queen of every room she entered, looked small, fragile. But beneath the trembling, something harder had begun to set, like steel cooling into shape. Maya stood near the door, her body heavy with exhaustion. The bite on her hand had reopened during the struggle, streaking her apron with blood. But she ignored it. She had ignored pain most of her life. What mattered was that they were alive. Still, her chest ached with the weight of the night. Her heart hadn't slowed, and she knew it wouldn't for hours. A tall officer stepped into the office, his raincoat dripping, his notepad in hand. "Mrs. Hale? Miss Williams? I'll need your statements tonight, if you're able." Margaret stirred, her eyes snapping toward him. Her voice was hoarse, but clipped with habit. "You'll have them. But first," she gestured toward Maya, her hand trembling. "See to her, she's bleeding." Maya blinked in surprise. For hours, she had been treated as little more than an interloper, a nuisance. Now, Margaret's first words to the police were not about her empire, her reputation, or her husband. They were about the maid who had held the door shut while the storm raged. "I'm fine," Maya muttered, shaking her head. But the officer was already signaling to the paramedic hovering in the hall. A woman in a navy jacket stepped forward, a first aid kit in hand. Margaret rose unsteadily, the strength in her legs almost giving way. She reached for the desk to steady herself. "Maya," she said softly, almost as if testing the name on her tongue for the first time. "Let them help you." Maya's throat tightened, but she sat reluctantly as the paramedic knelt beside her, cleaning the wound. Alcohol burned against the bite, but she barely flinched. The pain was distant compared to the chaos of the night. The officer opened his notebook. Start from the beginning. How did tonight unfold? Margaret's gaze shifted to Maya, then back to the officer. For a long moment, silence stretched. Then Margaret straightened, drawing herself up with the last fragments of her composure. She saved my life, she said simply. The officer raised an eyebrow. Ma'am? Margaret's voice strengthened, her boardroom authority sliding back into place, though it was lined with raw truth now. My husband planned to kill me. He nearly succeeded. And the only reason I'm sitting here speaking to you is because my maid, Maya Williams, stood between us. Thou, Maya lowered her eyes, heat rising in her cheeks. She wasn't used to being spoken of like that. Not in this house. Not by this woman. The officer scribbled quickly, then nodded. We'll need the recordings. Margaret looked at Maya. Maya handed over the phone, her fingers reluctant to let go of the device that had been their lifeline. The officer connected it to his unit, downloading the files. Jacob's venom now locked into evidence. This will hold in court, he said firmly. You've done the right thing. Margaret sank back into her chair, her body trembling again now that the adrenaline had begun to drain. She buried her face in her hands. My God. The newspapers, the board. They'll devour me. Maya watched her for a moment, then said softly, They can only devour you if you let them. You've survived worse storms than this, haven't you? Margaret let out a broken laugh, muffled by her palms. She lowered her hands, her eyes glistening. Not this storm, not one that started in my own bed. Silence stretched between them, heavy with truth. Then the paramedic wrapped Maya's hand in gauze and patted her knee gently. You'll be all right. Keep it clean. When the officers left to secure the scene, the room dimmed again, lit only by the faint glow of the emergency lights outside. The storm had weakened, but raindrops still tapped against the shutters. The house, once suffocating in its silence, now felt emptied, hollow. Margaret rose slowly, crossing to the window. She looked out at the flashing lights, the silhouettes of officers moving across the lawn. For the first time in hours, her posture softened. She turned to Maya, her voice quiet but clear. I owe you an apology. Maya blinked. Mom. Number. Margaret lifted a hand, silencing her. I called you filthy. I thought you jealous, envious. I dismissed you when you were the only one who saw the truth, and when you tried to save me, I struck you. Her eyes fell to Maya's bandaged hand, shame darkening her face. And you still stood by me. I don't understand why. Maya shifted, her chest tightening. She thought of her mother, of years spent cleaning houses where she was invisible. She thought of silence, and how often it had been forced on her. Because I knew what it felt like to be ignored, she said quietly. I wasn't about to let someone else die because of silence. Margaret's lips trembled. For a long moment, she couldn't speak. Then she nodded slowly. You're stronger than I ever knew. Stronger than me. Maya shook her head. No, ma'am. Just different. The words hung in the air, fragile and true. Outside, the storm finally broke fully, the rain easing into mist, the sky paling faintly with the approach of dawn. The officers would stay, the evidence would be secured, and Jacob Reed would spend the morning in a cell instead of a mansion. Margaret turned back to the window, her voice barely above a whisper. What happens now? Maya stood, her body aching, her heart still hammering but steady. Now, you fight. In court, in the papers, in every place that tried to tell you his mask was real. And you don't fight alone this time. Margaret looked at her, startled. For the first time, she saw not a maid, but an ally. Maybe even something more dangerous. A witness who had seen the truth and refused to be silent. And in that moment, as dawn began to bleed over New Orleans, both women understood the night had changed them forever. The storm had stripped them bare, and in the ruins of silence, a fragile but unbreakable alliance had been forged. The first gray light of morning crept into the Hale mansion, slipping past the heavy drapes and gilded frames, softening the harsh edges that the storm had carved into the night. The flashing blue and red lights outside had begun to fade, patrol cars replaced by a single unmarked sedan stationed near the gate. The storm had passed, leaving streets slick with rain and oak branches scattered across the lawns of the Garden District. The city was waking, but inside the mansion, no one had slept. Margaret sat at the long mahogany dining table, a porcelain cup of untouched coffee steaming faintly before her. She was dressed in a robe now, her silk blouse torn and wrinkled from the night before discarded upstairs. Her face was pale, lined with exhaustion, yet her back remained straight. Pride had returned to her posture, though it no longer felt like armor. It was something closer to defiance, a refusal to collapse. Maya stood near the kitchen doorway, her bandaged hand cradled close, her apron still streaked with blood. She had refused to change, refused to rest, her body unwilling to trust safety so soon. Her eyes darted to every creak of the old house, every shift of shadow in the corners. She had grown up in places where safety was always temporary, where calm was just the breath before another blow. Old habits did not vanish with dawn. An officer sat at the far end of the table, his notebook open, his tone gentle but insistent. "Mrs. Hale, Miss Williams, the district attorney will want your statements in detail. The recordings will be entered as evidence, but the more clearly you describe his actions, the stronger the case." Margaret's hand tightened around her cup. Her lips trembled before she steadied them. "I heard him outside the office door. He offered me tea. Chamomile," he said, but his voice. She swallowed. It wasn't care. It was calculation. And when I didn't answer, he grew violent. The officer nodded, jotting notes. "And Miss Williams?" Maya hesitated. She hated the sound of her own voice in rooms like this. The way people looked at her, measuring her worth before her words. But she steadied herself. "I was by the door. He tested the handle. He whispered through the crack. He said it would look natural, that no one would question." The officer's pen stilled for a moment, then continued scratching across the page. "That's consistent with the recordings." He closed the notebook. "You both did the right thing. Without that phone, without calling us, it could have ended differently." Margaret closed her eyes briefly, her hand trembling as it brushed across her forehead. "Differently," she echoed in a broken whisper. "Differently. Meaning, I'd be in a morgue by now." Maya stepped closer before she could stop herself. "But you're not. You're alive. That matters." Margaret looked up at her, startled. For a long moment, the weight of class, pride, and prejudice seemed to evaporate, leaving only two women who had survived the same night. The officer rose, tucking his notebook into his jacket. "We'll escort you both later for official interviews. For now, stay inside. No press. No statements. Let the evidence speak first." When he left, the silence of the mansion returned, but it wasn't the silence of the night before. It was lighter, though still uneasy. Margaret finally sipped her coffee, her hands shaking slightly. "Do you know what they'll say, Maya? The society pages, the investors, the vultures in the boardroom?" Maya's brow furrowed. "What does it matter what they say? You're alive to hear it." "It matters because I've built my empire on image," Margaret said bitterly. "And now the image is shattered. A husband in handcuffs. A wife locked in her office. A maid holding the only proof." Maya's jaw tightened. Then maybe the truth should matter more than the image. Margaret laughed, sharp and brittle, spoken like someone who's never had an empire to protect. Maya's voice softened, though it carried an edge of steel. Spoken like someone who's had to protect her life without one. The words lingered, piercing deeper than Margaret expected. She set down her cup, staring at the steam as if it could answer for her. "You're right," she admitted at last, the words sounding foreign on her tongue. "Without you, I'd be gone. That truth matters more than any headline." For the first time, gratitude flickered across her face without shame. She reached across the table, her fingers brushing Maya's bandaged hand. "Thank you." Maya shifted uncomfortably, unused to such gestures. "Don't thank me yet. This isn't over." As if to punctuate her words, the phone on the table buzzed sharply. Margaret flinched, then glanced at the screen. A message glowed from an unknown number. "You think the police can protect you forever?" Her blood ran cold. She turned the phone toward Maya, her voice breaking. He has friends. Maya's face hardened. Then we prepare. We don't hide. Not anymore. We use what we have, truth, proof, and each other. Margaret's eyes widened, searching Maya's face. In that moment she realized the maid she had once dismissed as invisible had become her fiercest shield. And maybe, just maybe, her only chance at reclaiming not just her life, but her dignity. The storm outside had ended, but the storm inside the Garden District mansion had only just begun. As dawn stretched across the city, Margaret Hale and Maya Williams sat side by side, bound not by blood or class, but by survival, and by the unspoken vow that silence would never again be their prison. By mid-morning, the Garden District glistened, washed clean by the storm, its streets scattered with branches and debris. The Hale mansion stood tall against the pale sky, but its walls no longer held the same sheen of grandeur. What once symbolized power now looked like a fortress breached, its gates flanked by police vehicles, its drive scarred with muddy tire tracks. Inside, the air was heavy with the aftertaste of fear and the sharp scent of disinfectant left by paramedics. Margaret sat in the parlor, a wool blanket wrapped tightly around her shoulders. The room was immaculate as ever, but she felt as though every painting and vase now belonged to a stranger. Her eyes, red-rimmed from tears and exhaustion, darted to every sound from the hall. She had fought in boardrooms, silenced journalists, and stared down competitors, but this was different. This was personal. Intimate betrayal carried a weight even her empire could not counterbalance. Maya entered quietly, carrying a tray with tea and toast. She set it down on the coffee table without ceremony. Her hand was still bandaged, the gauze stark against her skin, but she moved with steady purpose. "You should eat something," she said gently. Margaret shook her head, staring at the steam rising from the teacup. "I can't. You need strength," Maya replied, her tone firmer now. "This isn't over. The police may have him, but men like Jacob don't fight alone. You said it yourself, he has friends." Margaret's lips trembled as she looked up. "They'll drag me through the mud. They'll say I lost control, that I was hysterical, that I was manipulated by—" Her voice faltered, shame heating her cheeks. "By my maid." Maya met her gaze steadily. "Then let them. Let them say what they want. The truth is on that phone. His words, not mine. They can't erase it." Margaret laughed bitterly, the sound brittle. "Truth doesn't win in my world. Appearances do." Maybe it's time to change your world," Maya said quietly. The words landed like stones in the still air. Margaret stared at her maid, the woman she had once called filthy, and saw not servitude but defiance, strength, a spine unbroken by years of silence. She envied it. A knock at the door interrupted. 2 officers entered, one carrying a folder. "Mrs. Hale, Miss Williams," the older of the 2 said, "we've reviewed the recordings. They're strong, but the DA will need your testimonies. We'll arrange protection until the trial, but you need to understand this case will be public, very public." Margaret swallowed hard. "The press will feast on it." The officer nodded grimly. "Yes, but it's the only way to hold him accountable." When they left, Margaret's hands shook so badly she spilled a few drops of tea on the saucer. Maya leaned forward, steadying her cup. Their eyes met, and for a moment neither spoke. Then Margaret whispered, "I don't know if I have the strength for this." Maya sat back, her voice low but certain. "You do, because you're not alone anymore." The words sank into Margaret like warmth against frost. She looked away, blinking fast, unwilling to let the tears fall again. Later, as the house quieted, Maya walked the long halls, checking windows, listening to the creak of the old wood. She thought of her mother, of the times she had been forced to hide while voices shouted in the night. She had grown up learning that the world rarely protected women like them. But here she was, in a mansion, protecting a woman who once seemed untouchable. Life had a cruel sense of irony. But tonight, irony had saved them both. Back in the parlor, Margaret scrolled through her phone. Messages flooded in, investors demanding answers. Society friends offering condolences laced with curiosity. And one anonymous text that made her blood run cold. "He won't stay locked up. Men like him never do." Her hand trembled as she handed the phone to Maya. Maya read the message, her jaw tightening. "They're trying to scare you. Don't let them. But what if it's true? Margaret whispered. What if he comes back? Maya's gaze was fierce. Then we'll be ready. Do. Margaret's lips parted, startled by the certainty in her maid's voice. She nodded slowly, almost involuntarily, clinging to the conviction in Maya's eyes. The hours stretched long. By afternoon, the mansion felt like a cage. Officers rotated in and out. Patrol cars lingered by the gates. But the silence inside was oppressive. Margaret moved restlessly from room to room, as though every corner reminded her of Jacob's presence. Maya shadowed her quietly. Not as a servant, but as a guardian. At one point, Margaret paused in the grand hallway, her eyes fixed on the family portrait above the staircase. Jacob stood tall in the painting, one arm draped around her shoulders, his smile flawless. She stared at it for a long time, then whispered, I let the mask fool me. I let everyone believe in it. Maya stepped beside her. That's what masks do, but masks break. Margaret exhaled, a shudder running through her. And when they break, the truth is uglier than I ever imagined. Then, Maya's voice softened. Ugly truth is still better than a pretty lie. Margaret turned to her, truly seeing her for the first time not as a maid, not as a servant, but as the one person who had spoken when silence would have killed. She reached out, her hand hovering before it finally touched Maya's bandaged one. The contact was tentative, awkward, but real. Stay with me, Margaret said quietly. Until this is over. Maya's chest tightened. For years she had been disposable in the eyes of the wealthy, a tool, a shadow. Now, for the first time, someone asked her to stay, not because she was paid, but because she was trusted. I'll stay, Maya said simply. As dusk began to fall, the mansion settled into uneasy quiet. Outside, the city moved on, cars honked, streetcars rattled along their tracks. The garden district resumed its polished routine. But inside, two women sat together, bound by a night of terror, by truth captured on a phone, by the knowledge that survival had made them allies. Margaret sipped her tea at last, her hand steadier than it had been all day. You were right, Maya, she said softly. Silence doesn't save anyone. Maya looked at her, her eyes steady. No, ma'am, but truth might. No, and as the first stars pierced the clearing sky, both women understood. The storm was far from over, but they were no longer facing it alone. By the next morning, the storm had left the city washed and gleaming, but Margaret's mansion remained under a shroud of unease. The police had pulled their cars from the front gate, leaving only one unmarked vehicle down the block. The silence felt deeper without the steady hum of patrol engines, a silence broken only by the distant whir of cicadas and the occasional creak of the old house settling. Margaret sat at the breakfast table, the Times-Picayune spread before her, her hand trembling as she turned the pages. Headlines screamed her name in bold, Fashion Tycoon's Husband Arrested in Domestic Disturbance. The article was shorter than she expected, hedged with words like alleged and suspected, but the damage was already done. Her empire, her reputation, her carefully polished image all dragged into daylight. Maya entered quietly, balancing a tray with fresh coffee and eggs. She set it down in front of Margaret, noticing the paper clutched tight in her employer's hands. Don't read too much, she said softly. They don't know the truth yet. Margaret laughed bitterly. Truth is never what they print, it's what they sell. She jabbed a finger at the page. They're already calling me fragile, exhausted, unfit. They're building his defense before the trial even begins. Maya poured the coffee, her movement steady despite the knot in her chest. Let them write what they want. Words don't erase recordings. Margaret stared at her, lips trembling. You believe that because you've never lived under their gaze. In my world, perception is reality. By the time the truth comes out, the court of public opinion will have already convicted me. Maya sat across from her, folding her arms. Then we change their perception. We don't hide. We speak, loud enough they can't twist it. Margaret's eyes widened. You mean go public? Yes, Maya said firmly. If you let them write the story without you, they'll make you a villain or a victim. But if you tell it yourself, your words, your proof, you take control. Um, Margaret looked down, her pulse quickening. She had spent her life controlling narratives in the fashion world, bending the press to her image. But this wasn't about fabric or fortune. This was about survival, about dignity, and she wasn't sure she had the strength left. Before she could respond, her phone buzzed sharply on the table. She glanced down, her face paling. Another message from an unknown number. "We see you. Don't think this ends in court." Margaret pushed the phone toward Maya with shaking hands. "He has people everywhere. How can I fight that?" Maya read the message, her jaw tightening. She picked up the phone, her voice steady. "By refusing to be silent. Fear is what they want. Fear is how they win." The words carried a weight Margaret couldn't ignore. For the first time, she felt that Maya wasn't just her maid, or even her savior. She was something rarer, a voice she needed when her own faltered. Later that day, the DA's office called. The trial would move forward, expedited because of the severity of the charges and the clear evidence. Margaret would need to testify. Maya, too. The thought made Margaret nauseous. She paced her study, wringing her hands. "The board will demand my resignation. The press will swarm. Investors will flee." Maya followed her, patient but unyielding. "And what happens if you stay quiet?" Jacob walks free. He puts his mask back on. "He'll destroy you anyway, maybe not with his hands, but with whispers, with influence. Silence won't save you. It never does." Margaret stopped, her breath ragged. She looked out the window at the dripping oaks, her reflection faint against the glass. For years, she had been the woman with answers, the woman who commanded rooms. But now, the answers came from the maid she once dismissed. And strangely, that gave her more comfort than shame. She turned. "If I speak, I want you beside me." Maya nodded once. "I'll be there." The afternoon dragged. Reporters began to cluster near the gates, cameras flashing as soon as the curtain stirred. Margaret retreated deeper into the house, her chest tightening with every glimpse of the outside world pressing in. Maya stayed close, intercepting calls, turning away unwanted visitors, her presence a quiet shield. By evening, Margaret stood before the mirror in her dressing room. She wore a simple black dress, her hair pulled back. Her reflection looked older, worn, but her eyes, though rimmed with fatigue, held a flicker of defiance. Maya stood behind her, arms folded, watching. "They'll tear me apart," Margaret whispered to her reflection. "Let them try," Maya replied. "You've already survived worse." Margaret turned, startled. "Worse?" Maya's eyes softened. "Death in your own home. A husband's betrayal. That's worse than any headline. And you're still standing." The truth of it struck Margaret harder than any insult the papers could print. She nodded slowly, straightening her posture. "Then tomorrow, we face them. Together." Maya allowed a small smile. Together. That night, as the city settled into uneasy quiet, Margaret lay awake in her vast bed, the silence pressing in on her. But for the first time, she didn't feel entirely alone. Down the hall, Maya slept lightly on the narrow cot she had insisted on keeping in her small room. The mansion, once divided by class and pride, now carried the fragile bond of two women bound by survival. And though shadows of doubt still lingered Jacob's threats, the whispers of the press, the looming trial, there was also something new in the air: resolve. As the clock struck midnight, Margaret whispered into the darkness, as if confessing to the storm's ghost, "Silence almost killed me, but it won't again." And somewhere down the hall, Maya stirred in her sleep, her body still tense even in rest, as if she too had heard the vow carried through the quiet halls of the Hale mansion. The courthouse in New Orleans was an old stone building that carried its own storms within its walls. Reporters swarmed the steps, cameras flashing in a frenzy as Margaret stepped out of the unmarked police car. She wore a tailored navy suit, her chin lifted, her stride steady though her knees trembled with each step. Maya followed close behind, her presence quiet but unshakable, the gauze on her hand a stark reminder of the night that had brought them here. "Mrs. Hale, did your husband try to kill you?" "Miss Williams, what role did you play in this? Do you have proof?" The questions rose in a cacophony, hungry and cruel. Margaret's lips pressed tight, her silence deliberate this time. Not from fear, but from control. Maya walked beside her, shielding her as best she could from the crush of microphones and the staccato bursts of camera shutters. For the first time, Margaret didn't see Maya as her maid trailing behind. She saw her as her anchor, the only thing steady in a sea determined to drown her. Inside, the air was cooler but just as suffocating. Attorneys whispered in corners. Police escorted witnesses through side halls. And Jacob's supporters, men in tailored suits, women in pearls, clustered in the gallery, their faces masks of polite outrage. They turned as Margaret entered, their whispers sharp as knives. She's exaggerating. She's destroying his career. Poor Jacob. Maya heard every word. She glanced at Margaret, whose face was a mask of calm, though her hands trembled at her sides. Maya leaned close, whispering, "Let them talk. Their words don't matter. The truth does." Margaret nodded faintly, drawing a breath deep enough to steady her spine. When the trial began, Jacob was led in through a side door. His wrists were shackled, but his posture was regal, his smile practiced, his eyes sweeping the room with disdain. He spotted Margaret in the witness box and allowed himself the faintest smirk, a silent message, "They'll believe me, they always do." Margaret's stomach turned, but she forced herself to meet his gaze. For the first time, she didn't look away. The prosecution began with the recordings. The courtroom fell silent as Jacob's voice filled the air, echoing through the speakers. The silk of his charm at the door, the venom beneath it. The rehearsed lines about exhaustion, about no one questioning her death. Each word struck the gallery like a hammer. Gasps rippled. Even Jacob's supporters shifted uneasily in their seats. Margaret closed her eyes as the words played. Each syllable carried her back to that storm, to the fear of hands breaking down her door. Her body trembled, but Maya's presence in the gallery steadied her. Maya sat forward, eyes fixed on Margaret, silently willing her to hold. When the recording ended, the prosecutor asked, "Mrs. Hale, can you describe what you felt in that moment?" Margaret swallowed hard, her voice cracking. "I felt death at the door. I felt the man I trusted most showing me he had none left for me. And I felt saved, because Maya Williams heard it too, and she refused to let silence bury me." All eyes turned to Maya. She sat tall, her expression unreadable, but inside, her chest ached with something fierce and proud. The defense rose quickly, their voices slick with confidence. "Mrs. Hale, you admit you were exhausted that night, correct? Perhaps you misunderstood. Perhaps the storm, the stress, the late hour, maybe you heard what you feared, not what was said." Margaret's eyes flashed. "I know what I heard. And you've heard it too." The defense shifted tactics. "And this made Maya Williams. She has been in your household only months, isn't that right? A stranger in your home, perhaps with her own resentment. How convenient that she alone corroborates your claims." Maya's fists clenched, but she stayed silent until the prosecutor called her to the stand. She walked steadily, the courtroom watching, the defense already sharpening their knives. "Miss Williams," the prosecutor began, "why did you step in that night?" Maya's voice was clear, steady. "Because I heard him, because I knew what it meant. And because silence kills. I wasn't going to let it kill her." The defense pounced. "Ms. Williams, isn't it true you've struggled financially? That you might see opportunity in aligning yourself with Mrs. Hale, in making yourself indispensable?" Maya met the attorney's gaze, unflinching. "Opportunity doesn't explain bite marks on my hand. It doesn't explain recordings of his voice. It doesn't explain a door nearly broken down. The truth does." The gallery stirred. Even the judge leaned forward, studying her. The defense tried again. "You claim you acted out of loyalty to a woman who, by her own admission, treated you with disdain. Why?" Maya's throat tightened, but her words came fierce. "Because I've seen what happens when people stay quiet. My mother died believing her silence kept her safe. I won't let another woman die for the same lie." The courtroom fell into a hush. The defense faltered, regrouping, but the weight of her words lingered. When both testimonies ended, Jacob was asked if he wished to speak. He rose, his shackles rattling, his smile cutting. "I love my wife," he said smoothly. "I always have. She is ill, tired, and influenced by a maid who saw a chance to rise above her station. That's all this is: jealousy, manipulation, hysteria. But his words no longer rang the way they once had. They echoed against the recordings, against Margaret's trembling courage, against Maya's steady fire. The gallery was no longer nodding. They were watching him, masks cracking just as his had. When court recessed, Margaret slumped in her chair, drained. Maya came to her side, placing a hand gently on her arm. "You did it," she whispered. Margaret's eyes glistened. "We did it." As they left the courtroom, cameras flashing, reporters shouting, the storm of public opinion waiting outside, Margaret no longer felt like prey. She felt like a survivor, and beside her, Maya walked not as a servant, but as the woman who had turned silence into strength. And though the verdict was still to come, both women knew. The mask had already fallen. The truth had already begun its slow, unstoppable march into the light. The final day of the trial dawned under a sky heavy with clouds, though the storm held its breath. The courthouse loomed against the gray horizon, its steps crowded with reporters, photographers, and curious onlookers. Margaret stepped from the car first, her tailored suit immaculate, her face pale but composed. Maya followed, steady and unflinching, her presence as constant as the heartbeat Margaret leaned on without admitting it. Cameras snapped, voices shouted, but neither woman faltered. Inside, the courtroom buzzed with low murmurs. Supporters of Jacob sat rigid in the gallery, their pearls and cufflinks gleaming like armor. While others, victims' advocates, women's rights groups, ordinary citizens filled the remaining benches, their eyes fixed with a mixture of hope and dread. At the front, Jacob sat with his attorneys, his shackled hands hidden beneath the table. He wore the faintest smirk, the same one that had once charmed investors and charmed his wife. But the smirk no longer drew nods. It curdled in the air like sour wine. Margaret took her seat behind the prosecution, her hands folded tightly in her lap. Maya sat beside her, shoulders squared, her bandaged hand resting atop the table like a badge. Their eyes met for a moment, and no words passed between them. But something unspoken flowed. Solidarity, survival, the vow that silence would never again win. The judge entered. The bailiff called the room to order, and the jury filed in. Faces solemn, eyes unreadable. The moment stretched, heavy and brittle, as though the very air might shatter. The foreman rose, a folded slip of paper in his hand. He passed it to the bailiff, who delivered it to the judge. The judge unfolded it slowly, his eyes scanning the verdict before he looked up. On the charge of attempted murder in the first degree, we find the defendant, Jacob Reed, guilty. The word landed like thunder. Gasps rippled through the courtroom, followed by a stunned silence. Margaret's breath caught, her hand flying to her mouth. Tears blurred her vision, but they were not the tears of fear that had haunted her for weeks. These were the tears of release. Maya exhaled slowly, her chest rising and falling as though she had carried the weight of the entire trial in her lungs. She reached for Margaret's hand, steadying her without hesitation. Margaret gripped it tightly, their fingers entwined across the wooden barrier of the table. The judge continued, his voice firm. Sentencing will be scheduled. The defendant is remanded into custody, without bail. Jacob shot to his feet, fury breaking through the mask he had worn for decades. This is a lie, a conspiracy. You'll regret this, Margaret, and you. His eyes snapped to Maya, venom spilling. You're nothing, a nobody who thinks she matters. The bailiffs moved quickly, restraining him, forcing him back into his chair as his words echoed through the courtroom. But no one flinched this time. His roar was no longer power, it was proof of his downfall. Margaret rose to her feet, her voice sharp, trembling but resolute. No, Jacob, she matters more than you ever did, and the world knows it now. The gallery erupted, some in cheers, others in shocked whispers, but the sound washed over Margaret like music. She turned to Maya, her grip still firm, her eyes brimming with gratitude. We did it, she whispered. Maya nodded. No, ma'am, you did it. You found your voice. As Jacob was dragged from the courtroom, his shouts fading into the echo of closing doors, Margaret stood straighter than she had in years. The weight that had bent her shoulders was gone. She was no longer the fragile wife hiding behind silk curtains. She was a woman who had faced the storm and survived. Reporters swarmed the steps as they emerged into the gray daylight, their questions firing like bullets. "Mrs. Hale, how do you feel about the verdict?" "Miss Williams, do you see yourself as a hero?" "What comes next?" Margaret paused at the top of the steps, the crowd surging below her. For a moment, the instinct to remain silent, to protect the image she had polished her entire life, clawed at her. Then she felt Maya's steady presence beside her, and the words came. "I feel alive," Margaret said, her voice clear and ringing across the courtyard, "and I feel grateful. The truth has a cost, but silence has a greater one. My husband hid behind masks, and I wore one too, but masks break, and when they do, the truth is all that remains." "Mitaku." Flashbulbs exploded, voices roared, but Margaret didn't shrink back. She turned to Maya, extending her hand for the cameras to see. Maya hesitated, then took it, their hands clasped together in a gesture that transcended mistress and maid. It was solidarity, raw and undeniable. That night, back at the mansion, the silence was different. No storm rattled the windows, no footsteps haunted the halls. The house was still, but it was no longer suffocating. Margaret sat in the study with a glass of water, the curtains open to the moonlight. Maya sat across from her, the tension finally beginning to ease from her shoulders. Margaret spoke softly, almost to herself. "For years, I thought power came from wealth, from reputation. But tonight I learned it comes from truth, and from the courage of those who refuse to be silent." Maya smiled faintly, her eyes tired but warm. "Truth doesn't always come easy, but it's worth it." Margaret studied her for a long moment, then reached across the table, taking Maya's hand once more. "You saved me. Not just my life, but the part of me that believed in something more than appearances. I won't forget that." Maya squeezed her hand gently. "Just promise me one thing. Don't ever let silence back into this house." Margaret's lips curved into the first genuine smile she had worn in weeks. "Never again." Outside, the city settled into its rhythms, unaware of the quiet revolution that had unfolded inside the Hale mansion. Two women, one wealthy and broken, the other poor and unyielding, had stood against the storm, against the mask of a man who thought power made him untouchable, and together, they had proven that even in the darkest silence, truth could still be heard. The storm had ended, but its lesson lingered. Masks can shatter, silence can kill, and voices once found can save lives. And in the soft glow of moonlight, Margaret Hale and Maya Williams sat side by side, not as mistress and maid, but as survivors, bound forever by the night they chose to speak.